So, welcome everyone to the latest Ancerious discussion, which is a guide to magic and psionics in the Ancerious group. We're going to be covering a variety of topics, such as what is magic, how does magic exist in Ancerious, how does magic itself interact with technology and biology and RP, good examples of magic factions or individuals in Ancerious, what not to do with magic, what is Psionics? How does Psionics exist within Ancerious? How does Psionics interact with technology, biology, RP? Good examples of psionic use in Ancerious, what not to do with psionics, and how do the two interact with each other. So, to start off with, what is magic? Well, it's kind of a broad topic, but at the end of the day, in Ancerious as a group setting, magic is classified as the ability to manipulate or break the laws of physics using a system self-contained within consistent and well-defined rules. So magic can come, however, despite that broad bracket, in all shapes and forms, focusing on different aspects completely dependent on whatever magic system is being used, the nation that is using it, and the context in which it's being used. So magic is very loosely defined in terms of what precisely it is, purely due to its nature, and this is like pretty much from an in-character and out-of-character standpoint to allow players to create their own magic systems and take on magic for RP purposes. So, how does magic itself exist in Ancerious? Well, magic exists within the galaxy as a loose concept that is tied together by foundational rules, and these rules will apply to any magic system in the group. However, those systems themselves, not the fundamental rules, are totally player created, and you have total freedom to make your own as long as they follow these foundational rules. So the rules sort of themselves, which are tied into the lore, is all magic within Ancerious uses a substance called mana. And mana is formless and ethereal. It doesn't look like anything. It's completely invisible. You won't know it's there unless you are magic inclined. And it does not interact directly with anything physical. So for mana to actually interact with anything, it must be channeled through a magical system, whatever that may be that, spell casting, using runes, doing sacrifices with the soul, all manner of different magic systems, which is completely down to the person to create. But in the end, all mana comes from a dimension known as the Obolus. We just had a write-up of this, thankfully, it's quite new lore, but this is a realm of pure mana, and all mana flows from the Obolus into the Ancerious galaxy through what are termed ley lines. Ley lines are pretty loosely defined holes into the Obolus that again can come in all shapes and sizes, but at the end of the day they all continually allow mana in determinate amounts to flow into real space for use by magic. Ley lines themselves can be virtually anything you want. They can be as big as planets, they could be as small as a necklace, you could even have integrated ley lines into your species. It all depends on what you want. Bear in mind that the mana flow is going to be sort of representative of what the ley line is. So if you have a massive, grand planet ley line that is at the heart of your sort of empire, it is obviously going to be producing massive amounts of mana for consumption by millions of people, lots of industry, all sorts of bits of your society. So you can power huge amounts of things with it. But if your character, who is a mage, is carrying around a little necklace which is a ley line in order to give them sort of access to mana at all times, that tiny little necklace isn't going to be able to generate huge amounts of mana capable for your mage to casually delete everything ever. So be aware that while ley lines come in all shapes and sizes, do sort of reflect on what they are in the RP. So magic can only be used, regardless of what system you're using, if and where mana is present. So if there is no ley line nearby and there's no mana nearby, you cannot use magic because there's nothing to draw upon. So, you've got to stay near to ley line areas, or you bring your own ley lines with you. Ley lines can actually be mobile in this sense. As we said, you can sort of have it in a necklace or whatnot. This allows magical nations to effectively mount them on all sorts of platforms, be that an individual's attire, or maybe on a ship, or something of the like. It means that the magic nation is no longer restricted by operating near ley lines, but it does mean that there is a weak point for other nations to exploit by targeting ley lines themselves and destroying them to prevent magical abilities from being used. However, while mana is incredibly good, too much of it in one place can cause degrading effects on the laws of physics. This is known as saturation, and it is very dangerous. As such, siphons are used to channel excess mana back into the obulus. So if you have an area with huge amounts of ley lines, it's essentially like leaving multiple large taps on in your bathtub, and then all of a sudden it overflowing and destroying your house. Or pretty much what you want is a load of plug holes that can regulate that, so you can pour all of the water that you want and not flood yourself. Be able to use what you need, but not just, drown yourself in your own bathroom. So you build siphons as well as ley lines in magic-heavy areas and mana-heavy areas, and this will prevent any sort of saturation from taking effect. Obviously, at the same time, any sort of mage or magical sort of, user, be that individual or tech or whatnot, if it uses too much mana through various means, it can either overload itself or cause localized saturation events. It's kind of the same thing as, you can't just hook yourself up to a full-on power line and expect to survive the amount of energy flowing through you. It will kill you, it will burn yourself out, it will arc to nearby people and hurt them, cause damage, etc. It's the same thing with mana. If you try and force too much of it through a magical system that you're using and you don't have the power, or you don't have the knowledge to use it to that ability, you're going to hurt yourself and you're going to hurt a lot of people nearby. But at the end of the day, any nation can enter the galaxy with their own magic system, or make their own magic system entirely if they wish. It has to follow the ley line in the mana system. This is to ensure a foundation of similarity between all magic, and essentially gives all magical systems a baseline of strengths and weaknesses for everyone to use. So at the end of the day, any sort of magic system, be that weird and wacky necromancy around souls, or, the ability to manipulate elements or whatnot, they're all going to be roughly on the same page. So while they might do wildly different things, they're all going to be operating on the same sort of very core principles. And this helps with sort of internal balance and consistency in the group. So how does magic interact with, technology, biology, and the RP sense? So, for all intents and purposes in Ancerious, magic is considered on par with technology and biological prowess. Okay? This is for balance and narrative purposes, and prevents any sort of abuse that can come from using magic in an RP, and we'll sort of get to some of that in a bit. But at the end of the day, we treat everything sort of on the same page. It's just easier to do so. It means that nobody's going to walk into a conversation or an RP or a topic and basically be like, well, I use magic, so I trump technology and biology, or, vice versa. It keeps everything on the same page. So, magic, however, does come with many benefits, obviously. Its ability to heavily manipulate and even break, to an extent, the laws of physics allow all sorts of uses. And it is really only limited to your imagination. So you can do crazy things with magic and RP. And again, it's only really limited to what the GM's going to allow you to do, the context of the situation, and your imagination. If you want to do some crazy thing out of left field that's cool for the story using your magic, absolutely do so. That's what your magic is there for, you know? So it does have its own sort of draw. That's what people like about magic. They can sort of not pull things out of thin air in regards to abuse, but I would say pull off things that, you know, somebody with regular conventional technology or the like wouldn't be able to do so, and add that extra little bit of a flair. So, you know, any use of magical systems need to stick to some very core rules, just as any technological or biological capability does. And these are the three sort of really key rules if you're going to be creating any sort of magical system in the group. You need to follow these. Otherwise, it's just going to get rejected or it's going to cause problems in RP. These are internal consistency. So your magical system has to be consistent with itself. You know, low level mages are going to be able to do X thing. High level mages are going to be able to do Y thing. They're not just going to be randomly like doing bits and pieces completely out of left field. You know, if your magical system is built around necromancy and souls, you know, killing people, harvesting the souls of the dead, you know, in your system, you're not going to be running around, you know, using life magic to bring people back to life or that sort of thing. You know, if your whole thing's around necromancy, like evil necromancy or whatever, you know, you're not going to be like running around with water magic and like having water gun fights or like, you know, really weird stuff out of left field. So you need to be consistent, especially with your power level. If you are writing a magic system, you very much need to write what power scaling is typically going to be found with your faction and in this system. So what can an average Joe magic user do if he goes down, you know, one of X paths, if you have different things? Or what can somebody with the highest possible training, highest possible ability perform? You know, be that as it may, one of your like OCs or something that you might use for particular RPs. Just always do the low end and the high end, and you want to always maintain that level, because if you state in this, you know, this system doc that the highest dude can, you know, maybe level an entire suburb of a city with a fireball, yeah, that's cool. I'm going to be alright with that. But if in the RP you decide to summon like a Giga Fireball and nuke an entire city off the map, I'm going to be questioning how that works. Now, if you tell me it's because this said individual is super powerful and he can only do it once every so often and blah, 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 I might let that slide. But if it happens often, I'm going to call you out on it and I'm going to make you change it and retcon stuff. So you've got to be internally consistent. And while internal consistency is always really important for any storytelling, it is absolutely crucial for magic. I cannot stress this enough. Magic is often horrifically disliked by people, especially in sci-fi RP. Okay? If you mention magic in some other groups that, you know, other people in this chat may even know of, you will get laughed out of the group or told to fuck off. So, you know, even in Ancerious, where magic is quite, you know, widely accepted, you have to show it's internally consistent, because if you don't, if you slip up once, people are not going to accept that magic system and people are not going to RP with you because they're going to call bullshit like instantaneously. So internal consistency is, in my opinion, the biggest out of the three, but obviously it's very much integrated with the others. So the next one is balance. Kind of touched on that with the internal consistency. Internal consistency and balance kind of goes hand in hand, but obviously you don't want to just take your magic system and dial it up to 11 so that everyone's running around with, like, you know, insta-kill meme spells everywhere that nobody has any counters to, because that's going to be completely unbalanced. And you're going to get a lot of bullshit being thrown at you, because if you turn up to a fight and you're just like, well, my super duper aura spells basically just kill the souls of everyone around, so I just turn everyone in your fleet into an absent. The other player's going to be like, oh, okay, how do I counter that? Oh, well, you get countered by like X thing that you don't have. Brilliant, fun fight, fun RP, 10 out of 10. You will get shat on. And so you've got to be very careful about the balance. Always give counterplay to whatever you're doing. It's kind of the same thing with everything else, of like, always give counterplay and the ability for the other player to always write back a reaction or a way to try and stop it. With magic, this is even more important, because it's kind of easy to be like, I do a spell and I subterfuge your targeting system with like shadow magic, and the other player's like, okay, what does that do? Oh, it blinds all of your sensor systems so you can't shoot me. Okay, what effect does that have? Like, what's it equivalent to? Is it equivalent to, some sort of conventional stealth systems, or like active jamming perhaps? And the other person's like, well, no, it just blinds all your sensor systems because it's magic. Well, alright, I now can't shoot you, I now can't do anything, GG, people are not going to be happy with you, and it's not going to be balanced. The third really key part is narrative benefit. So, as should be the case for any technology, any part of your, species biology, or anything of that regard, you need to think, okay, I have this magical ability. What narrative benefit does this give me? What can I bring to an RP if I use this? Okay. Again, going back to that big aura like Instagib field. Well, okay, if you turn up to an RP and you use that, you just kill the RP. Congratulations, there's no more story involved. That's boring. People are going to shit on you about it. So, find a way to integrate into that RP. So a good example might be, you're able to manipulate the souls of your enemies, okay, in your magic system. This is consistent. Well, you may be able to generate huge pulses that, snuff out the life force of enemies in an area and supposedly bypass all defenses. Doesn't really have a narrative value. So, instead, you can think about it of, well, you can manipulate the souls of enemies or other, like, beings. So, maybe instead, you use that ability to summon semi-incorporeal ghosts aboard enemy ships to fight the crew. So effectively, you just reduce the enemy's effectiveness because you've just boarded all of their ships with, like, undead spirits of, like, their old dead comrades that have come back to fight them. They're semi-corporeal, so they're tough to kill, but the crew can still kill them. It means that you've crippled the effectiveness of the enemy player's force, but the enemy player still gets the ability to write back fighting off those ghosts, but it still shows off your ability to manipulate souls. And it now has a cool story where the other person can, like, fight off their, undead crewmates who were just fighting alongside them 20 minutes ago, until you blow out their ship or whatever. So, always put narrative first. At the end of the day, if you're not sure, ask a guide, ask an admin, but most importantly, talk to the person that you're in the RP with and work out something cool that works for both of you. On the whole topic of magic is considered on par with technology and biology and, whatnot, always try to give an example of a conventional thing that your magic is sort of equivalent to. So if I have a bunch of mages on a starship and I conjure a magical firebolt and I fire at an enemy cruiser, the other person's going to be like, Okay, what does that count as? And you could be like, well, it counts as a huge plasma cannon, or it could count as a nuclear explosive. You know, for all intents and purposes, it has that effect. It's magic, but the moment you say to somebody, Telros, this is a nuke, this is the equivalent to a nuke hitting your ship, Telros is going to be like, oh yeah, I know how that works, that's cool. And he immediately just writes the damage as if he would write against a conventional thing, but he can do it in a much more spicy way because it's a magical attack. You know, so magic, you know, while it can achieve things that technology and biology might not be able to do themselves, it shouldn't be used to create things that are overpowered or extremely hard to counter or defend against. They should always be used in a creative and positive fashion. You know, magic is unconstrained by usual conventional tech. That should not be used for abuse. It should be used to unlock things that you won't normally see in conventional tech writing. So think about it as a spice to add to a particular dish that you don't see very often, but it allows you to open up avenues for new and more interesting flavours, rather than just, I'm going to add 20 tons of like death pepper to my chili con carne so that you never taste again for the rest of your life. You know, it's that sort of thing. So always sort of like work with other people around that. In regards to how you sort of come about and interact with, you know, technology and stuff in general, if you are going to be making a magic faction or a faction with magic, you don't have to build a faction around magic to a degree. Always make sure that it's not being ham-fisted into that faction. So you create a magical faction, think about how that would be integrated into your society. How would it affect your you know, culture? How would it affect your government? How would it affect your technology? How would it affect your military? How would it affect your religion? How would it reflect your society as a whole and your people's outlook? You know, your traditions, etc. Just having something like magic would not, you know, if we had magic in our society today, I can tell you right now, society would change overnight in the blink of an eye. So if you are creating a magical faction or a faction with magic to some degree, don't just ham-fist it in as an afterthought. Don't just have like, oh, they're just a conventional normie faction, but like they happen to have magic. No, it will have an effect on that nation, and that should be reflected in character, in your lore, in your nation sheet, and in your writing. And you could use that, again, like an extra spice, to delve into things that you might not normally do. You know, how does a nation whose culture has the ability to somewhat break the laws of physics interact? How does it approach things? These are the things that you need to think about because they're awesome. They're what make magic factions cool. They're what makes magic cool. You know, it's kind of like a little temporary rule breaking in regards to that. You know, you're normally constrained by the rules of physics, you're normally constrained by certain rules and limitations. Magic allows you to sort of bend and break those rules, but you have to be very careful about how you do so. Otherwise, you ruin it entirely. So, this sort of comes into sort of good examples of magic factions in Ancerios so far. So I've chosen three. The first off is the Drakes. The Drakes are our oldest magic faction in the group's history. They've pretty much been here since the beginning. They're run by a Sortigan. They have their own pretty well fleshed out pantheon of gods, which have all got really cool personalities, are all written out. They've got a whole magic system based around different elements of their race, you know, and their different abilities and like the different gods and alignments. They've, you know, displayed this in numerous RPs over quite some time, and you know they're now engaged in some of the like panopticon arcs and stuff with their characters. I definitely recommend checking them out. They've got quite an interesting society as well. You know, they're a kingdom, and there's a lot in the religious and societal side for them. They're not really a fighty faction in the traditional sense, so they're good if you want to go for a, you know, unconventional sort of pacifist sideline magic faction. Next up is a player who sadly is kind of no longer with us because he's dealing with a lot of stuff IRL, done by Flavor Pickle. He kind of half built them, but from what he did so far, they were fantastic. It was Ascendant Eternal, which was kind of like a collection of ancient races from Ancerios' ancient history that had some like esoteric grand plan to resurrect the Ancerios Overmind using mana and magic. They had a really truly alien aesthetic, were highly enigmatic, had some really, really cool ideas, and a very, very extensive magic system that never really got finished, but was based around, I mean, I would tell you, but it was so in-depth and esoteric that I had no idea what he was talking about, and that's what made it perfect. And finally, Goose here runs the Cabal, which is a group of like powerful magical individuals who are sharing a pursued grand goal, and they will do anything to achieve that goal. They've got a very cool aesthetic, and they've got a very well developed magical system, and they're like slowly getting into the whole storyline, and hopefully they're going to come to the fore and run their own sort of like arc where they start doing some funky stuff, bringing sort of magic to the forefront. So that will be cool to see. So what not to do with magic, and these are pretty key here. These are what ruins magic in virtually every other setting that I've ever seen. So never ever use magic to try and circumvent technology or conventional factions methods. Okay? The biggest, longest going meme for magic in any group is when somebody says, my magical weapons bypass your shields and armor and defenses because they're magic. That's not how it works. That will never be how it works, and if I catch anyone doing that in this group, I will do horrible things to their ass, because it pisses me off to no end, okay? This is actually what happened in the first group I ever RP'd in. It died because of this. This thing right here. So much people just go like, oh, well, my attacks are magical, so they bypass your stuff. Okay, but why? Why do they bypass my shields? Why do they bypass my armor? Why do they auto-hit me? Why do they affect all of my people instantly, despite the fact that you've never encountered my species before? Magic is great, as I said. It can bend the laws of physics. It could break the laws of physics. That's cool. But if you're firing magical attacks at me, like big mega gravity shots or whatever, well, why won't my gravitic shields defend against that? If you're firing a massive fireball at me, well, why won't my plasma shields defend against that? If you're firing magically augmented, you know, like silver bullets at me, well, why won't my point defense, intercept that? If you're trying to destroy my soul or, you know, ravage my species' minds, if you've never actually encountered my species before, how are they doing that? How are they instantly trying to go for that? Won't they need to poke and prod and see what's actually going on? You know, can your magic actually penetrate my heavily armoured hull of my ships at millions of kilometres distant across an entire solar system? You know, at the end of the day, as I said, magic is on par with technology and biology. Just because you're doing a magic thing does not mean you can casually bypass a technological thing or a biological thing purely because of magic. That's not how it works. Now, if you have an explanation for how it can do that, and it makes sense, it's consistent, it's balanced, and it gives the opportunity for the enemy to reply to such in a way that isn't hard countering and is good for the narrative, absolutely no problem whatsoever. But if it doesn't do that, it will get denied so hard by the mod team that you'll never be able to walk again. Next up is another super, super critical thing which always kills magic in groups. Never handwave something with the because magic. Never do that. That is the ultimate way of essentially saying, I'm too lazy or shit at writing to do X, so I'm just going to wave it off and just say, oh, it happens because magic. If you do that with your magic faction, you are going to get your magic faction revoked extremely quickly. And it gets even more egregious when it's in a serious or major plot situation, or in the middle of a serious battle, or anything like that. If something has just happened in character where, you know, you've basically just autoed somebody, or you've just shrugged off like an obscene amount of firepower, or you've just had your character evade death by like some stupid act or whatever, or any number of things, and you just go, oh, it's fine because it's magic. Well, no, that's not going to fly. And I encourage anyone who listens to this, if you see that happening, you immediately alert the guides and the admins, and we will come running, because we want to, like, absolutely cut down on that as much as possible. It's just awful, and it never ends well. So, next one is never be inconsistent with magic. An ill-defined magic system can have, you know, crazy feats coming out of its ass in every RP, from like random normie people soloing entire armies and fleets, and then being unable to do so in the next RP for some arbitrary reason. You know, it allows pretty much the writer and the user to decide the capabilities of the magic system on the fly, which is kind of like the excuse, oh, it's because magic. So it's poor writing, it's shit balance, it's no consistency, and it's bad for the narrative. And we will crack down on it. And anyone else should as well if they see that happening. You know, consistency is absolutely key. As said earlier, do not use magic casually as a hand fist to a nation. You know, it's extremely out of place, and quite clear that you're not using it for narrative. We've had a few factions join this group where they've kind of had this really normie society, and then they've had this magic system tacked on the side that only specific people can use, but the specific people who use it are conveniently in the military, or like the leaders, so they could be like entities or whatnot, and then the military can gain access to like Magitech and that. It's obvious. It is literally obvious that the moment you do that, you are not interested in using your magic system for the benefit of the narrative and your nation's narrative. You are looking to use it in a competitive or military standpoint where it's going to give you no bonuses or story add-ons, but just shooty, shooty, hurty, hurty on people. And it looks so out of place when it's just bolted on like that, and we can tell from a mile off. Again, don't use magic for its military applications only. You know, a magic nation, even with a little magic in its society, as said, can theoretically break the laws of physics. You know, it could use heavy magitech stuff and change everything on a dime. So if your fleets and armies are going around with like heavy magitech that's like super duper powerful, but all of your guys again are just like in a normie post, you know, whatever society, running around everyday life with like little to no magic, that's going to attract our attention, and we're going to start grilling you about why that is. And the final one is, don't assume that a magic user, be that Magitech or an individual, can just casually pull whatever magical power he needs from a ley line without consequences. You know, with massive power use comes massive problems. You know, never avoid downsides or drawbacks to your magic system or characters. You know, drawbacks, as we've said in numerous, in fact, probably virtually every discussion so far, drawbacks and downsides are what make good story. They're what make a system or a nation or a character or a plot line. Your magic system should be no different. Have good drawbacks, okay? Have good downsides. If your character taps into, his super giga magic system, say in an RP where he's getting his ass handed to him, and he's like, haha, you've fallen into my trap, and decides to, summon a nuclear blast or whatever with his magic, well, that's cool, and he decides to shield himself at the same time, well, he's probably just gonna fucking die, to be honest. The moment you're funneling huge amounts of mana through a specific individual or a specific ritual, whatever, it's probably going to go horribly wrong. So how you want to do those downsides is completely up to you. Just make sure that like average Jim Bob Joe from like the dollar store magic shop can't just decide to like summon a slot 3 equivalent super weapon on a whim because like Jody down the fucking pub decided not to sleep with him that night and he's angsty. So always try to have these downsides and never just have it so that like people can do whatever whenever they want. So, any sort of points or questions about magic before I move on to psionics? I may as well ask now before we move on to the sort of next thing. Type it in comms text chat if you have anything. I think I've covered everything for the most part. I would like to quickly note that I'm not going to go over super big in detailed examples of magic systems because holy shit, we would literally be here for the next 10 years because it really is just open for you. We purposefully left it up in the air for your use. So, how do you think a non-magic faction discovering magic should ideally go? Well, obviously magic is in the group. It's in the galaxy. So it's absolutely public knowledge that magic is a thing. The question is, does your nation have any knowledge of how to use a magic system? It doesn't even have to be, for your particular nation to create it, to access it. You might be like, okay, we know there's mana, we know there's a ley line nearby, but how do we actually use it? So you'd probably want to do journals regarding to research where, they're having entire research bureaus dedicated to studying mana, studying magic systems, trying to get it to work, trying to figure out all these different things, horrible things going wrong, things going a bit different. And then you want to kind of like drip feed in, discoveries and breakthroughs. And then eventually your nation can get access to using basic mana stuff and basic magic. And it kind of goes from there and then slowly disseminates through your society. And you kind of end up going that way. It's the same with any other technology, it has its ups and downs and eventually comes to the point where, it's kind of everyday use. Are there any rules or stipulations, especially for fusing combined technology and magic? So there's no real rules or stipulations other than the kind of fundamentals that I went over, make it balanced, make it consistent. But if you want to have a railgun that uses mana to power its linear accelerators, okay, and the shell has a rune tip which gives it a particular explosive charge on impact, awesome. Really cool, You can easily merge tech and magic together because, again, as I said, magic being able to bend and break the laws of physics, kind of, as I said, being that extra spice that you can add on to things, you can take existing weapons and tech and make them do X thing that they could never realistically normally be able to do, but have it because it's magic augmented. Now, obviously, if you're going to do that, you need to write up, how it does that, and also write up, various downsides. You can't just be like, well, I have this normal plasma shield, but because I have magic runes all over it, it can basically tank everything ever, and, the only way that you can stop it is by using this particularly niche weapon. Well, there's no real downside there, so we're obviously going to say no to that. But at the end of the day, you can't go far wrong, and if you want, just work with other people, and try to be balanced, and if you follow those kind of rules, you really can't go wrong with creating Magitech. So, any other sort of questions on the magic front? Or am I good to move on to Psionics for the time being? I will be taking more questions at the end, by the way, so like I can cover various bits and pieces. Alright. I'm going to move on to Psionics, and then, you know, we can do more things. Oh, okay. So, yes, you can use mana to power things. There is actually one of the guides in the chat can probably link it to you, but in the power generation sheet that we've created, there is a mana reactor. They are woefully inefficient for what they are, but they do come with some pretty big upsides. So, yeah, like if somebody wants to link that to you, the answer is yes. You can have like a weird, I guess, magical steampunk nation, or like a magical something punk nation which is running on mana, for example, if you wanted to do something weird. A good example of that would actually be Docky's Mention, which are kind of like, fuck me, how do I even describe them? They're kind of like stone people. Yeah, they're like golems, but like with weird aesthetic and crazy stuff, and they're all powered by like mana and stuff, and they have internal ley lines and the like. So yeah, completely fine. So, moving on to psionics. So what is psionics? So, psionics are classified within Ancerious as the ability to manipulate the inherent psion field that permeates the galaxy through the use of a being's mandala, and through such being able to manipulate and bend the laws of physics. So, psionics come from a mandala and only really affect the area that they're being used in. They also cannot outright break the laws of physics like magic can, but they can bend it quite heavily. Psionics are, as such, much more restricted than magic, but are far more directly integrated into the lore and ancient timeline setting, allowing very in-depth connections to be made to establish story and setting. So, how sort of do psionics exist in Ancerious? Well, the psion field is effectively where all sort of psionics come from. Now, the psion field exists within Ancerious as a fundamental sort of force, okay? Akin to gravity or electromagnetism or the nuclear weak, you know, whatever. It exists everywhere in the galaxy, you know, and as such. But it is stronger in certain areas. It is stronger near the core of the galaxy and the psionic poles, and it is weaker in the galactic halo and the more distance that you go away from the galaxy. Now, this field, which is kind of all pervasive, can be manipulated using something called a mandala, which is a complex organ or piece of technology or a naturally occurring object that has an imprint on the psion field, and through that imprint can then affect the field around it. This manifests itself as psionic abilities. Think as you will, your mandala is a magnet, a bar magnet, okay? And the psion field is like the Earth's magnetic field, yeah? So your tiny magnet can't really do anything to the whole bloody field, but in its certain little area, it can affect things. So that's kind of what a mandala's like. Now, a mandala itself is often, not always, but often, tied to the sentience of a living thing, be that an AI or a biological thing, and is often referred to as a person's soul. An individual can, however, gain or lose their mandala due to, you know, genetics, personal changes, operations, or a variety of reasons. Now, psions themselves come in many forms, with most, I'd say the majority of living things in the galaxy having basic mandalas, okay? Which essentially means that you can interact with the psion field even if it is just like the fact that your brain, at its core, has a magnetic field. Even if it is teeny, teeny, tiny, yeah? But it's sort of the same thing for a mandala. Psions, however, can ramp up and use this mandala to affect the psion field, much more powerfully, to light psions being able to, lightly sense others around them using the field, all the way up to, like, psionic entities that can, like, rip apart planets. Just like electromagnetism and, theoretically gravity, well, not theoretically in Ancerious, but, whatever, the psion field can have an opposite polarity, which counteracts its effects. And this is called a null, or anti-psionics. And this is typically a hard process to achieve, but can be done via technological means or by an individual who undergoes a psion flip, which can kill them. These nulls can counteract psions in their area, with light nulls being mainly unaffected by psionics, like mind reading, sensing, etc., up to, like, full-on null fields, which are able to induce complete mandala death across a wide area, so killing somebody's soul. If you lose your mandala, or, your soul or whatever, this is not always the case, but if you've had such before and you typically lose it, you become what's called an absent, and you lose most of your higher brain functions and your sentience. And you become little more than a living robot which can just respond to commands and little else. You become a puppet, more or less. And in very rare and extreme circumstances, a psion may even link, usually in death, and only with natives, but sometimes not, to a place called the Panopticon, which is a strange development of the psion field that acts kind of like an afterlife. I'm not going to touch too much on it here, but in the notes I'll have a link to sort of like what that is. So, how does psionics interact with technology and biology? Well, Psi-Tech is very much a thing within the Ancerious galaxy. Most of the people here who are members and whatnot have encountered Psi-Tech and used it, interacted with it before. So it's pretty common. These pieces of technology, while having sort of endless applications, all use artificial mandalas to project, interact with, or even stop the psion field. Examples of these can be null fields to stop psions, or brain implants to amplify the mandala in your brain so that you can use psionic powers. To mental connections that allow people to communicate across massive distances psionically, and countless other stuff as well. So psion tech is very common and can be used for all sorts. Most psi-tech, however, is decently advanced, and non-psionic nations may need quite a bit of time to study and integrate these into their nation, more or less in the same way that we talked about with Magitech. Everyone knows the psion field exists. They might have mandalas, but just because they have mandalas doesn't mean that they can, like, start, telekinetically levitating and all that sort of stuff. So there's got to be proper development, research, integration. So, if in an RP you do use psionics to do, direct attacks such as, gravity waves, superheated beams of plasma, throwing objects around at high speed, etc. Well, these can all be stopped and interacted with by technology. At the end of the day with psionics, you are using the laws of physics to your advantage and, manipulating them. Well, so's technology at the end of the day as well. So, shielding and armor types are more than capable of interacting with psionic attacks. And enough conventional firepower will overwhelm a psion, even if they're, like, throwing up shields or whatnot. Psionics are just a different way of achieving the same result as technologies, but it's just using your mind and power. So, artificial psions are completely feasible. And, you can have psionic AI, and, you can turn non-psions into psions. And natural mandalas also exists in some objects and given locations, and this can have either positive or negative effects on psions or people in the area. You find them across the galaxy. Biological-wise, for psions, biological hive minds are a major part of the Ancerious lore. and galaxy. And all native hive minds are psionic in some way, keeping connection through the psion field and even sharing a single consciousness in some cases. And virtually all native species have mandalas and can be affected by psionics, so, you know, no problems whatsoever there. You know, we've got all sorts of things from, you know, Cutie Mai, which is like a psionic hive mind, all the way to Parma which is a gigantic tumour hive mind, which is psionic. So, you know, it's pretty crazy in that regard, but, you know, psionic nulls also typically affect psionics in such a way as to cause discomfort, migraine, spasms, fits, and even death to biological psions, depending on, you know, how close they are, how powerful the null is, how powerful the psion is. And it can cause code corruption, synapse misfires, neural loops, and death to artificial psions as well. Another thing to note is that, just sort of like mages and power, if your psion is starting to use way too much power and try to manipulate the psion field in such a way that is kind of beyond the scope of their abilities, it is kind of like using a particular muscle in your body too much. You know, you're going to cramp, you're going to tear, and you're going to injure yourself. And, you know, maybe even completely destroy that muscle if you're not careful. Psionics, exactly the same. You can easily kill yourself if you try to, like, you know, summon a giga supernova. Again, like Jim Bob Joe getting upset about the local pub, like, you know, throws a tantrum and summons another slot 3 bloody super weapon. Like, you know, he's going to kill himself well before that ever happens. So, good examples of psionic use in Ancerios. Well, thankfully we have quite a few of these. The first one is the army of the Panopticon. They are a current major threat to the galaxy, and they started out literally as an experiment by a completely non-psionic human faction into the realm of psionics. However, they have developed to the point where, having weaponized the, you know, the Panopticon that I mentioned earlier, trying to control it, they now have a wide variety of abilities, and they have a massive story and arc around them for a quest to effectively change the psion field for their own power. And they're now really, really dangerous to the galaxy. So that's like the sort of, like, I guess, main flagship psionic standard bearers that have pushed it forward. Another one, the Manevan Sovereignty. Good current nation of psions who are kind of on a wide power spectrum. They suffered quite heavy casualties at the end of the Second Ancerios War, so they don't have much people left. But they themselves have been tweaked as a people over time to the group's psionic lore, and so they now have, like, excellent integration with plots, and, you know, because they've been integrated quite easily into the whole psionic lore, it's inherently providing them with, you know, their own limitations and drawbacks. So with our own system, you don't need to worry so much. Ranxi is also another good example of a nation who's only just now moving into psionics, who didn't have them before, and they're doing it through, like, ritualistic and religious monk priests, augmenting their armed forces first, because that's where they're using it in. They're using it in the armed forces because that's where they've seen psionics used by the Panopticon, and they're now doing additional research and integration as they try to hunt down the army. And another good one as well would be the Lithorians, which are a psionic hive mind native to the galaxy, who have developed quite clearly and have, you know, various psionic bits and pieces in their nation, which have all come together quite nicely. So, what not to do with psionics? Well, okay, do not treat psionics like magic, where you can just break the laws of physics at will, willy-nilly. With psionics in RP, try to use your environment, okay? Be inventive. Is there something around that you can use with your psionics to influence the course of the RP to your benefit and for a cool narrative benefit? You know? Is there various objects that you can use to, you know, throw at the enemy because you're currently unarmed? Can you try and go into the mind of the enemy and fuck with them? Or can you do various other things? You know, it's just Be inventive, but in a way that isn't just magic, so you can just, conjure whatever you want. Be smart about psionics, and be very careful about sort of what their limits are. Like magic, don't just use psionics for any sort of competitive or combat benefits that will allow you to win fights better. Yes, you might be able to torment the minds of the enemy through psionic assault, but no, it shouldn't hard counter anyone. It shouldn't force anyone into a shit situation, and it should always be able to have counterplay. So don't be a complete dick about that. Just because you have psionics doesn't mean that you're going to be ultimately, crushing on people that have technology and whatnot, just conventional stuff. Again, like magic, don't ham-fist psionics into your nation as a band-aid, or an afterthought, because you're like, oh, psionics are pretty cool, I'm just going to add a psionic thing into my nation, and not have it be a sort of integral part, or at least well written up. Integrate it properly, give societal repercussions for psionics, distinct changes that would be made. If it is relegated to only a small portion of your nation, why? What's the purpose? What's the narrative purpose? As long as you have those reasons, it's fine. On the same sort of card, don't try to create null species or null tech out of thin air in your nation just to try and counter psionics or screw with psionic plots. It is not appreciated. So, good examples of this is we have had players before that have kind of come into the galaxy and they've been like playing a human nation, okay, like the United Terran Imperium, okay, normal human nation, normal everything. But mysteriously, they're all psionic nulls. But they're normal humans, but they're all psionic nulls. Well, a bit weird. Why is that? Like, have they ever fought psionics before? Did they evolve over time to defend themselves against psionics? No? Okay. So why are you trying to hard counter psionics then? What does that bring to your nation narratively? Good example of how to do this well. Stalker Tech Priest with the Huron Technocracy. They're all mostly nulls. They have lots of anti-psionic stuff because they fought in his home universe a massive war with psions and has established law as to why they have that. But Jerry entering the group with just a generic nation that has like loads of nulls because he just conveniently doesn't like psionics and wants to fuck with it is going to get told to eat shit, quite frankly. And it's going to be the same with, if you've just got conventional technology and all of a sudden you've got a null field in there, it's like, well, hold on a minute, where did that come from? Now, it's fine if you engage in psionics in the group and your nation's like, Jesus Christ, we don't really have a way to fight that. And they research into anti-psionics and null tech. Awesome. Not a problem. Nobody's going to have any issues with that. But just sort of giving you that immediately because you don't like psionics, nah, that doesn't fly. So don't create your own strange psionic system, which in part sort of does what the established law does, but also is strangely not affected by the drawbacks. So we created the Ancerious psionic law, which is now pretty integral, actually, because there was a lot of people running around with like magical powers and psionics, where, none of it was unified. And because of that, you would have some people who were like, I have an anti-psionic weapon, and somebody would be like, oh, well, it doesn't actually affect me because, like, I'm technically psionic, but I'm not really a psionic. I'm a psyker. Or, like, I've got X thing that's exactly the same as X, but for some reason it isn't affected by Y when the other X is also affected by Y. So it didn't make sense. So at the end of the day, if you're going to use psionics and Ancerious, use the system we've got. It's what we're working with. If you want crazy stuff, you can do magic, but like psionics, Psionics is there if you really want to get integrated into the group lore. It gives nice tie-ins. There's lots of history behind Psionics in the ancient timeline, especially if you're going to be native. Plenty of stuff to work with. Comes with its own limitations, comes with its own benefits. Job's done for you, yeah? Don't try to make a Psionic system like you would a magic system and just, like, say, oh yeah, it's like the established one, but, like, I'm not affected by nulls or whatever. Like, we're just going to tell you to piss off. And in my opinion, the most important one of what not to do is never use psionics, and this kind of goes for magic as well, to godmod, metagame, or power play. Okay? This is a flat no. You may be able to bend the laws of physics. You may even be able to break the laws of physics. Okay? That should never, ever put you in a position where breaking group rules is allowed. End of story. I don't care if it makes sense for your super gig entity to like rip the fucking information out of a person's character's mind, yeah? Where they have absolutely no way of stopping you, and then they're just going to completely crush your soul and you instantly die, yeah? That person, unless they've given your consent to write that, if you write that for them, I mean, that's just godmodding, and we're going to tell you to not to do it, because that's cancer, and it's not going to be enjoyable for the other person. And at the same time, having psionics and magic should never force the other sort of, I guess, end player to be railroaded into a situation where they have to write that. Because you might force them into a position where they have no choice but to accept the fact that they're about to get sonically bummed up the arse and, like, their character killed. Well, that's okay, but did you agree with them beforehand that their character was going to die? Did you have lead up and give them ample warning that this was going to happen? If yes, okay, give or take, context is key. If not, and you're railroading somebody into that, but you're like, well, it just makes sense because, you know, my sonic giga entity has the power to do that, and it's what they would do. If at any point you find yourself going, it's what my nation would do, or it's what my character would do, yeah, no. No. That's not how that works. It is what is better for the story. What is more enjoyable for both sides. Even if it's the other person agreeing to have their mind be crippled for their character, and the Giga entity walking off, cool. Just always give the opposite person the chance to either write whatever damages or effects it has on them, or to try and attempt to counter such. There always has to be counterplay. And if you're not giving them counterplay, and you're using psionics or magic as the excuse, you cannot hide behind that. Just because they come with additional, like, abilities to bend and break in-character rules, does not give them the ability to break out-of-character rules, and it doesn't give them the ability to break RP etiquette. Flat out, end of story. So, my final segment is how do the two, magic and psionics, interact with each other. So, they are fully able to interact with each other in the Ancerious setting, for your information. After all, both manipulate the laws of physics and to a degree, you know, break such. So it's just a tug of war. It is literally a game of tug of war. They both effectively do the same thing, but in different ways. So, obviously, at the end of the day, neither is more powerful than the other, and it is purely dependent on context on what is happening in the RP. You know, you're going to have the different powers of the individual, you're going to have different pieces of, like, magic or psionic tech, you might have, you know, a master scion that will easily overpower a rookie mage. You might have a particularly powerful piece of magitech, which is going to be completely able to surpass a casual low-tech piece of psionic equipment. It all depends. You know, location also plays a part. If your mage is right next to a major ley line, you know, that can give magic users the advantage. While scions, if they're near the core or the sonic poles or any of the sonic phenomena, are going to obviously have a boost trying to, you know, pull the tug of war back and forth from the mage. You know, and at the end of the day, an individual may be able to use both magic and psionics to get the effects they want. There's no distinct hard law for this. Like, I'm not going to be able to tell you that, you know, if you combine magic and psionics, you get plus 20% to your power. Like, that's not how it exists. You know, you can use them to super boost the two. You could be like, oh shit, I need to, you know, there's a tense character RP and somebody's, you know, there's a cruiser overhead that's threatening to bomb the city and the group needs to take it down. You know, your crazy mage guy might also be a scion, or the two combine their powers. They're both focused on just like, you know, crippling the cruiser with gravity powers. Well, the mage can cast spells of gravity magic, and the scion can use his powers to like do gravity stuff, and they both do the same effect, and they reinforce each other. Boom. You know, you can use it for overlaps, but at the end of the day, if you're going to combine magic and psionics, do it for the story, do it for the narrative. I've not really seen it done, so you know it could be interesting, but be aware that all of the rules that I have basically told you and all of the how-tos apply to that situation, probably more so than usual because you're using both of them. So if you're using both magic and psionics together, we're going to be watching you pretty closely because either you're going to do something epic with the story or it's going to go horribly, horribly wrong. So, you know, and, you know, if you are going to combine them, please don't try to use it in a competitive manner or like try to one-up somebody. And if you're going to fight against each other with it, don't try to be competitive on like, you know, oh, my magic's better than your psionics, or like, oh, psionics in general was better than your magic. Like, don't do that. Just work with the other person and just enjoy, write good story. But yeah, that's kind of everything that I have. So yeah. Any questions in regards to anything that I've said? People are typing. Excellent. As I said, this will all be in the notes, so... yeah, if you have any ideas for like Psionics or Magic or just integrating anything into the lore, just go to one of the Gen Devs and just place your idea and just get some feedback. Or ask the community or whatnot. You know, everyone's pretty, like, up to date with the whole, like, Psionics thing. And there's usually people around for Magic, so well, you can easily get feedback. And the notes will be posted after this is finished recording. So yeah, same process as anyone else. Or any other ideas. Alright, well, if that's all of the questions for the particular topic, I'll stop the recording and then we'll go on to just other questions. Any experts for particular supernatural? So Goose, me, Drac, and Sortigan are excellent magic people. Psionics, I would do me or Victor, really. We're the kind of psionic peeps. So, yeah. Right. In that case, I will wrap that here, and then we can continue on. So, thank you very much all, and I will see you again soon.